Chad, I wanted to talk about this. Fucking Nintendo went after a charity, bro. When you think Nintendo couldn't get any worse, they got even worse, Chad. Like, honestly, they did. They literally got worse. Dude, this is so funny. I saw, like, what the fuck? Bro, I haven't seen this, but I wanted to see this with you guys because I thought this would be really funny to see this. This is great. Let's take a look at this.
So Nintendo's recently found itself in a wide variety of controversies, starting with the way they set the standard for $80 games.
Nintendo, fuck your charity.
Mario Kart
Just like
World
VShojo? Bro, they went after a fucking charity. That's crazy.
And inspiration to be like, we'll do the same thing. The game keycard situation, where you've got physical media that doesn't house all of the game files and data in them, requiring a digital
Nintendo
download.
and VShojo
You've got
collaboration.
the recent price increase for the
you think Nintendo collaborates with VShojo to bring back VShojo back again? Would be the most craziest comeback ever, to be honest.
Nintendo Switch. The prices for the original Switch have gone up significantly. And then Mario Kart recently also saw a controversy revolving around online play and the way Nintendo stripped players the choice of being able to pick the more traditional lap courses rather than being forced to play those intermission courses, the highway courses. They're not as preferred. And then them coming out with patch notes that imply they fixed it or they adjusted it, only for players to find that the patch pretty much made no difference. And now Nintendo's embroiled in a controversy surrounding charity, specifically an event called RTA that takes place in Japan. It's a speedrunning event, and it was inspired by Games Done Quick, which is also a speedrunning charity event. It all began on late June of 2025 when news outlet Automaton noticed that when RTA released the list of games that be featured in this speedrun charity event, Nintendo games were nowhere to be seen, unlike prior years. People speculated as to why. Many already assumed that it was more to do with Nintendo side of things, specifically with some of their rules. Some people assumed that it might have to do with their end user.
First time joining a stream, I found you a few days ago and felt like supporting. Hey, Zero, how you been, hun? Welcome, welcome. Are you also a YouTube frog by any chance? Welcome, welcome. Why does everyone fuck with charities? I don't know, man. The funny thing about it, this is happening apparently in Japan, right? Part of a RTA in Japan, apparently. A Japan-based charity. I assumed it was a charity on the Western side. Well, apparently this is in Japan. So during the RTA in Japan, summer of 2024. So damn, even Japanese people are like, they don't get no leeway against Nintendo. That's crazy to hear that.
License agreement asking users not to publicize bugs or exploit them for improper use. And the thing about speedrunning is that it's all about using those bugs and exploits and overcoming those technical limitations in order to finish the game within a time frame that it wasn't meant to be. But all we could do was speculate until 4 days ago.
Drop some donos if you feel like supporting. Shut the fuck up, Dark. Don't listen to him, okay?
When RTA published the following tweet that reads, "Notice regarding the use of Nintendo games at RTA in Japan." Embedded in the post was a link to the following article that they published on their official website, where they explained exactly what happened. Now, this is a Google translation from Japanese, but you'll get a general gist, a pretty good idea of what...
I don't understand why people don't use ChatGPT to translate stuff in Japanese or in any other languages, to be honest.
Their message conveys. So it reads right here, "Notice regarding the use of Nintendo games in RTA in Japan. We'd like to explain how we have come to use games for which Nintendo holds the copyright in RTA in Japan, and why Nintendo games are not being used in RTA in Japan summer of 2025, as well as our future actions. RTA in Japan has previously used Nintendo games, but on June 13th, 2025, Nintendo pointed out that, quote, the use of Nintendo games by a corporation requires prior permission, and that our previous use..."
Are you serious? Man, you gotta ask mommy or daddy for permission in order for you to do this.
"Was without prior permission and constituted unauthorized use. RTA in Japan wishes to continue using Nintendo games and has begun discussions with Nintendo regarding permission. As of now, the decision has been made that RTA in Japan will submit individual licensing applications to Nintendo for each event and game. However, for RTA in Japan Summer 2025, we were unable to clearly determine how to handle this at the time the participating games were announced, so we have decided not to use Nintendo games." For events held at RTA in Japan after RTA in Japan summer of 2025, it is expected that permission will be submitted in advance to Nintendo and that permission will be granted before the event can be used. Basically, Nintendo said that by law, we're allowed to mandate that even if you are a charity event, as long as you're a corporation, you're required to ask permission of us in order to use your games for your cause.
Well, they're consistent at least. Yeah, true on top of that.
RTA is a nonprofit organization, but it is worth noting that while they did start as kind of a small entity, they did eventually incorporate back in 2020, and the event has grown in size quite significantly since its inception. So it all eventually caught the attention of Nintendo. Unfortunately, RTA was notified a little too late and they could not request permission in time before the event, so they had no choice but to exclude Nintendo games for this year, and they're hoping that next year they'll be able to have enough time to be able to submit all of the permission requests that will allow them to...
That's crazy that they need to ask permission in order to play their games for a charity event. A freaking charity event in their own homeland in Japan, dude.
Stream Nintendo games again. Now, regardless of what Nintendo's entitled to, you can imagine that this has all generated quite a bit of backlash for Nintendo. It's not been good for optics. But before we get to that, you know what is good for you? The sponsor of today's video, Groons.
Oh
this,
my
ladies and gentlemen,
God,
is a
Groons?
comprehensive nutrition snack.
Tasty. Anyways.
Below. All right, so let's look at the community reception to all of this, because regardless of what Nintendo is and isn't allowed to do legally, it doesn't change the fact that ultimately Nintendo decided to go after a charity event. It'd be one thing if this was like a for-profit organization,
Yes,
if this was some kind of event that was making
indeed.
money, but all the proceeds from this particular event go to charities, such as Doctors Without Borders. So you can see right here, for example, when Dexerto reported on this, this is a post talking about how Nintendo has forced Japan's biggest speedrun charity event, RTA, to remove its games. After years of use, they told them each title now requires approval. There's a post that
is so retarded. That is actually straight up retarded, dude. Dude, Nintendo as a company has gone crazy. They've literally gone crazy.
has garnered tons of interaction. So, almost 1 million views as of the recording of this video, tens of thousands of likes, and plenty of people dissing Nintendo. So right here we have a gif of Mario and Luigi fist bumping each other, and the post here reads, Nintendo executives after preventing a charity from playing their games. Other folks posting things like, what's wrong with you, Nintendo? And some of the top posts include, peak Nintendo here, highest selling console ever, while also being one of the most anti-consumer gaming companies on earth. The strength of their first-party titles actually allows this paradox to not collapse itself. Here's another...
Hey man, it's those Nintendo fanboys. They like to defend that fucking plastic box and that fucking company for some apparent reason. They have been consistently crazy. They have been ever since they started copywriting music and like YouTubers and everything, That's where the downfall of Nintendo happened, Ever since their last CEO died, they have went insane. Yeah, I think definitely, the last CEO, that passed away or so was better,
A post from Pirate Nation that reads, Nintendo forces Japanese charity speedrun event to remove its games from the lineup, citing unauthorized use. Organizers must now seek permission for every game.
That's so stupid.
Once again, hundreds of thousands of views, tens of thousands of likes, and tons of people lambasting Nintendo. Some people going as far as saying things like it is extremely ethical to pirate Nintendo products, and this has garnered almost 10,000 likes. And if you go to news outlets like Games Radar, who've reported on this, and go to the comments section, you see that there's general protest and dissent against this move on Nintendo's part. There's this sentiment that Nintendo's being very petty when
hey, thanks for the gift or so. Make sure you say your thank yous.
Comes to what is a charitable event, one that serves everyone. The speedrunners get to have their moment in the spotlight, charities get to get incredible contributions, and Nintendo itself gets to have their games and their products promoted, and they get to have good optics out of it. But instead they decided to go the course of enforcing laws strictly, to a point where it's generated tons of backlash, especially because charities are involved. People feel like Nintendo being as controlling as they are in this specific instance is just a step too far. Even in pro-Nintendo news outlets like Nintendo Life, comments are saying things like, that really is quite pathetic. Nintendo always gotta be the asshole of the group. Holy, that's really bad if Nintendo really doesn't make their public image look good, especially when you think of how they like to try to portray themselves. Now, on the other side of things, you've got Japanese commenters who have kind of lived in Japan and understand.
I'd be very curious what the Japanese audiences have to say about this.
Japanese copyright law better, who are providing sort of a more neutral stance where, they certainly don't deny that it is a bad look for Nintendo, but they also understand that, these kinds of procedures have to be followed. These are
That's so dumb. That's so dumb. I get it. I understand it because the culture of like Japanese culture, you can't really voice your own opinion because you don't want to be different and everything like that. So I completely understand that, but I have to object that 100%.
Translate a post from Japanese Twitter users who said things like, I can see how hard everyone is working as a volunteer, and I understand the frustration of Nintendo game RTA runners who are unsuccessful this time. I also understand Nintendo's position as a company that wants to be honest, so no one is at fault. Here we have another post that reads as follows. First of all, thank you to the event organizers for your hard work in dealing with this. It's true that they were at fault for letting things slide, but I also think that it was thanks to that things were able to go ahead. It's true that the scale of the event has grown so much that they've had to say that what's no good is no good. Everyone knew this, so I don't think there's any point in just criticizing it. Essentially, this was bound to happen when an organization is at the scale that RTA is right now and is also
That's ridiculous in my personal opinion.
Incorporated and taking official sponsorships, even if it's for charity. Nintendo is still going to be very stringent about making sure that their products are being used properly, that proper permissions are seeked out, so on and so forth. And look, Nintendo is within their right to do that, but it's freaking charity, man. There were other ways to handle it where Nintendo could have been like, okay, this year we'll allow this to slide. You didn't seek our permission, but we will just let you do what you do. Next year, though.
Even then, on top of that, it's just games that they own that they're trying to do speed runs for charity. They bought it with their own money, the game, to do this. That makes no sense whatsoever. Once you pay somebody to own it, you can do whatever you want with it.
Make sure you submit the proper permissions. Like, we can talk about the laws and what Nintendo's entitled to and what they're not entitled to, but at the end of the day, the companies can decide how heavily they want to enforce those laws. And Nintendo's just notorious for enforcing laws and regulations and exerting control over their IPs to an extreme degree, to the point where they mar their community's ability to be able to, as a community, support their products and to spread the word and to do really cool things that would benefit ultimately everyone. I mean, there are plenty of stories out there about how Nintendo has gone after.
You can't even buy the old Pokemon games, but emulating them will open you to a lawsuit. That's so stupid, to be honest.
Fan creations, whether it's their own mods and games based on Nintendo IP, or just going after content creators who don't abide by specific regulations, going after events and tournaments. It's a thing of like, yes, according to the law, Bethesda can probably shut down a bunch of mods. They can probably shut down projects like, Skyblivion and Skywind. But Bethesda knows that so much of the longevity of their games and their community lies in mods and whatnot, so they're deciding to not enforce those laws and letting people kind of go ham with the creations that the community can partake in. Nintendo can do this.
Well, remember, Brazil is coming after Nintendo because of their practices of what they're doing in their TOS. So I'm rooting Brazil. Why would you want to root a company who has bad practices against their consumers? It makes no sense.
Same here, and just look the other way for this year at least and let the charity event run as is. But they have decided to be very stringent, and that's on Nintendo to enforce, and they're within their rights to enforce that. But it is going to negatively impact the charitable event in the sense that a lot of people might come to these events to watch Nintendo games, in particular Nintendo games being sped run. And so the fact that those games aren't going to be there might potentially diminish viewership, might potentially diminish contributions. It's just going to put a dent on this event. And so ultimately what it all results in is
they cannot fight against Brazil.
Marring charity. It is kind of the ultimate result of all this, regardless of what's legal and what isn't legal and what Nintendo is and isn't entitled to. So it's just a bad look all around. And Nintendo does have a habit of engaging in ways where they're legally allowed to do what they're doing, but it's just a bad look and ultimately is detrimental to everyone. I mean, when you look at their history with events like tournaments for Super Smash Brothers, back in 2013, there were reports of Nintendo wanting to shut down the Super Smash Brothers Melee Evo event alongside its stream. And eventually Nintendo did pull out of Evo altogether because Sony acquired Evo back in 2021, and Nintendo just from then on didn't want any part to do with Evo just because a competitor is attached to it now, and
That
I
is
don't know
so
how that serves
dumb.
anyone. It's just going to result in the Smash
That's
Brothers scene
actually so dumb. Literally, Nintendo pulled out just because Sony owns Evo. That's crazy. That's just wild to hear that.
being diminished, which is bad for players and for Nintendo as well, who want their IPs to have a certain longevity to them. They even shut down third-party Smash Brothers tournaments like the Smash World Tour back in late 2022, and this was a huge controversy.
I remember that.
Laws are there to protect entities from nefarious actions. It'd be one thing if RTA was doing something nefarious that forced Nintendo to protect itself, but all RTA is doing is hosting this fun event that will ultimately make a lot of money, that will go towards charitable causes, that will help out a lot of people. And so the fact that Nintendo is going so hard on the letter of the law and the letter of their policies for a charity event, even if they're technically allowed to do that, there's just no scenario in which Nintendo's gonna come out of this looking good. Like if I were a game developer and somebody used my game, even if it was without my permission, to run a charity, if they were streaming my game and doing speedruns and stuff, I'd be incredibly content. I'd be honored. And I'd let them do whatever they want on that front if it ultimately leads to a good cause being supported. But Nintendo, just in their very corporate way, just has pulled a move that, again, ultimately harms everyone across the board, especially Nintendo.
Hey man, those Nintendo fanboys, they just, you know, you gotta, hey man, people who are fans of Nintendo should get them boys under control. If you don't speak up or say anything to them, they're just gonna run wild or so in your community. That's why we gotta bring bullying back, you know? We gotta bully those people to shut the fuck up, you know? So...
and the optics surrounding them. So it's just a classic case of Nintendo shooting itself in the foot.
Definitely not a pro gamer move.
The hope is that proper permissions are submitted for next year.
They should probably
and that
get their
Nintendo games
card
ultimately
revoked.
can come back to RTA. RTA seems to be optimistic that once permission requests are submitted, Nintendo will be good to say yes, but it's the fact that they didn't submit those permission requests as a corporate entity that led to this whole situation. So on one side, you could argue that that's on RTA. They should have gone through the proper channels. But on the other end, Nintendo, you can let this slide and you'll be okay and you'll be supporting charity. What's so wrong about that, you know?
You think they're going to try to support charity?
I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on Nintendo's actions against RTA and where you stand within this particular issue. Do you think...
I stand on the charity side, to be honest. At the end of the day, you know, Nintendo is just a terrible company. They're really speedrunning becoming the worst company in the entire world, aren't they, huh? Also, I think Nintendo won't let you use third-party accessories. What the fuck? Are you serious? That's crazy. Nintendo lost its soul with Iwata's passing and Reggie's departure. Yeah, Doug Bowser is turning out to be more evil than Bowser himself. Ironic. Nintendo is the Disney of video games. Their fanboys are equivalent to Disney adults. Yeah. Mod your GameCube, guys. Mod your 3DS. Mod your Wii's. Yep. Wow. For years, people have been bending over backwards to defend Nintendo. I'm curious how they would spend this. How would defend this? Yeah. I'd be curious how they would defend this. There's no way you can defend this at the end of the day. Hey, Reaper. This is crazy though. Honestly. They aiming the whoever is the first place in the AAA industry to take their place. Hey man, you know what? Do whatever you want at the end of the day. I'm not supporting Nintendo, so even then, I'll buy my Nintendo Switch from third market price and also my games because they're cheaper. I'd rather not have a single ounce of my penny going towards Nintendo at the end of the day. Hey, I can go buy me a Switch OLED for like roughly like $200 right now if I wanted to. But yeah, anyways. That's the end of the video. You guys can comment, like, subscribe, do all that fancy jazzy stuff. Yeah, fuck you, Nintendo. I don't really care. I hope you get the backlash that you deserve. I swear. One of these days, the Nintendo fanboys will wake up and smell the roses that their famous company or so is not the greatest at all. So, anyways. Bye-bye, OF. It's not OF, I swear. Anyways, that's the end of the video. And, yeah, fuck you, Nintendo. And peace.